Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. This is an important issue. It's an issue that crosses state lines, party lines, phone lines, and unites all Americans. We've all heard complaints from constituents about robocalls, stories about people being harassed by debt collectors, about calls on mobile phones with familiar-looking caller ID numbers that turn out to be fake. I got a text from my mother on Tuesday. I am reaching out to my senator. I just got spam calls to my own landline, supposedly from my landline. What is the regular person supposed to do except grin and bear it? So I texted back, on it. Robocalls have turned us into a nation of call screeners, only picking up when we are sure it is a number that we know. And I think this is an important sort of underappreciated downside to robocalls. It's not just the nuisance. Certainly the fraud is the biggest deal. But the fact that a lot of people don't use their phones as phones anymore for that reason is a significant economic issue, and it needs to be addressed. The first step towards taking on robocalls is to make sure that the enforcers have the authority that they need. That's why in the last Congress, I reintroduced the Robocall Enforcement Enhancement Act, which would extend the FCC's statute of limitations and give it authority to fine bad actors without providing a warning. And that's why I voted to advance Senator Thune and Markey's Trace Act out of the Commerce Committee last week. But we're not going to stop this problem with enforcement alone. We also need to scale our efforts with technology. We must fight bad technology with good technology. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the prospects for using validation and blocking tools and other tech to fight back. These tools should not be an excuse for providers to make more money or invade consumers' privacy. Finally, there may be more that we can do to educate consumers. Are we doing enough to help people avoid being tricked by scams in the first place? Do they know about the tools available to identify or block unwarranted calls, or the best way to report illegal calls? I look forward to the hearing today and working with Chairman Thune and members of the subcommittee to address this frustrating issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. We're glad to be joined today by the chairman of the full committee, Senator Wicker, who was instrumental in helping us move the bill out of the committee.
Senator Schatz, I too got a call from Pontotoc, Mississippi, from my dad just last month about a malicious phone call. And joined the club. And I'm doing my best on that matter.
Thank you. Let me start with Ms. Saunders. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that the FCC has fined robocallers $208 million, but collected about $7,000. So in addition to the sort of cost of doing business question, the cost is actually close to zero. And I'm wondering how we can do better to improve the recovery rate.
Well, the recovery rate by the government is poor, but the recovery rate in private class actions is significant. And it's so, as unpopular as they are, it is the class actions that are driving compliance. And that's why the major industries are pushing the FCC to change the rules so that these class actions won't be available. But I would like to take a step back and look at what is driving all those robocalls that has been the subject of discussion today. Who's paying those robocallers? How are they making money? They're being paid. Those robocallers are lead generators. They're making the calls illegally. When they get someone on the phone who's interested in purchasing a home security or a car insurance or a life insurance contract, that's a live lead. They then refer that lead to a real American company, State Farm, Royal Cruises.
Oh, and it sort of launders the illegal activity and incentivizes it, but at some point it gets handed over to a legit business.
That's exactly right. And those legitimate businesses are paying for those calls, and then when they're sued, are paying for the leads, and then when they're sued for making illegal telemarketing robocalls without prior express consent, they say, we didn't know anything about the illegality. Our contract with this lead generator or this independent contractor requires them to comply with the law. We're not responsible.
I got it. Okay. So it seems to me there's the problem of the recovery rate. There's the problem of the sort of upstream, whatever you want to call it, the upstream or downstream companies that are benefiting from this, and plausible deniability through the contract itself. And then there's this question of criminal penalties, and I'd like to lead into the Attorney General with a question about how we can enhance AG's authorities here. Why don't you just offer us your thoughts on what AGs can be empowered to do and how that would make a difference?
Typically, the AGs are empowered by our own state laws, and frankly, I think a lot of legislative bodies are challenged to stay in front of this type of technology. So I'm a proponent of state solutions, but I also think the partnership with federal authorities is important here. I will say one of the challenges, whether or not it's a civil penalty or a criminal penalty, is the ability to get our hands around these people.
To find them.
Yes, to actually get them in a headlock. And that's not easy to do. And in fact, we're fortunate we have one case where we have a partial player in a headlock. But that's always going to be the challenge. And so I think having in our toolbox the ability to enforce criminal penalties will help. But I don't think it's the silver bullet.
So the other thing I think offers an opportunity for consumers is, first of all, education, because I think there will be some number of robocalls happening, even if we do all the right policies. And so it seems to me that likely the most vulnerable among our constituents are still in danger of being not just spoofed and spammed, but really scammed and ripped off. And so we have to kind of work on the consumer education side, and then apps are going to provide some utility to people, but I kind of worry about having two tiers of phone users, those that are educated, know how to use an app to block all the nonsense, and those who don't. And so, Mr. Rupi, I'm wondering whether you can address that question, and just one more sort of nuance to this, which is there are now apps that you have to pay for to block robocalls, which I suppose is better than nothing, but it seems to me that this ought to be like a seatbelt. This ought to be both in sort of tech terms and in sort of public policy terms like a utility. We just don't allow robocalls. You don't have to pay to block them, and you don't have to forfeit your privacy to some telecommunications or tech company in order to have that utility. You just ought to be free of these things. So can you comment on that?
Thank you, Senator. Those are both great questions. So let me tackle the first of your questions. And I would respond to that by saying U.S. Telecom has long believed, and I certainly believe, that there's no single silver bullet to the robocall problem. Okay? There has to be a holistic, comprehensive approach that includes tools, that includes enforcement, that includes technologies like Shaken, but also education. Education is a huge component and an important component, and it's happening. You know, the example I give is that my 83-year-old mother up in New Jersey got the grandparent scam, and fortunately she has a son that talks to her relentlessly about robocalls. She didn't take the call. My in-laws had a friend down the street that was at the CVS buying the iTunes cards, and a clerk stopped the sale. Both those are examples of education, and education can be powerful. But again, no single thing in and of itself is going to solve this problem.
Thank you.